Hello, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, I'm going to run through some of the tricks that I use in the MPC for processing kick drums. I'm going to provide you with a free effects chain that you can download and use yourself in the MPC. And I'm going to show you how to recreate the famous Pultec Low End Trick in the MPC. Let's jump in. So before we get into it, people do ask, what lens am I using today? The Canon FD 28mm 1979 vintage lens, obviously. One of my favourite lenses. Lighting wise, things are a little bit different today. It's a bit gloomy outside, so I've got a fill light on my left, which is where normally the window comes in. I use natural light, and I've got a key light to my right. People do ask, so there you go. Jumping into the MPC, I've got a bunch of kick drums. Now I will say, with my prep for this video, I did find that the 909 is probably one of the best kick drums to show you how these effects work. But I will process them. I've got them on the track rather than at pad level, so the processing will affect all of the kick drums, but I probably will focus on the 909 with this effects chain. And like I said, you can download this effects chain and it's a good starting point for your kick drums. Now what I want to say is, and I always say this in videos, don't do anything by default. This effects chain will get you in a good starting point, a kickoff point if you like, for your kick drums, but don't copy the numbers exactly. Every kick drum is slightly different, so you're going to need to use your ears to dial it in, but I'm going to put you in the ballpark. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to get you in a good place, a good spot to start. I've also put the effects channel kind of in the order that I would use it, and that is transient design, compression, EQ, and then a bit of saturation at the end. So you're affecting how the kick drum will, what kind of transient it will have, what kind of attack and sustain it will have. And then with compression and EQ, you can shape it further, and then you add some character at the end. Obviously, you can change the order and you don't have to use every single effect. I don't tend to use every single effect, but I have that effects chain there ready for me when I want to start working on my kick drums, and it puts me in a good place to start with. And obviously, you can add different effects as well. You might want to add some reverb. You might want to use a different EQ. You might want to use air lo-fi, for instance, just different effects. But this is a good starting point. That's what I'm saying. Feel free to download it. Feel free to share it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through the effects and how I use them and how they can affect the kick drum, just to give you some tips and some hints on how you can process your kick drums in the MPC. So, excuse me. Starting off with air transient. This is a good place to start. Now with transient design, you're going to affect how the transient, the first initial part of your kick drum is. And this is really, this is probably for me one of the best ways to shape your kick drum. An air transient, great plugin in the MPC. With the attack, you're going to affect how it starts, I guess would be the best way to describe it. So you can hear a little bit of a click that I've introduced, but most importantly on kick drums, sustain is what I tend to use the most. Now if you listen to a 909 kick, it's got the initial transient, then it's got a kind of woo afterwards. With sustain, you can affect that. Now I love that sound. However, if your mix has got a lot of kind of 200 hertz, 150, 200 hertz mud, and also you've got a lot of bass line going on, that additional woo in a kick drum is not so good, not in mixing. It can build up really quickly. And also, if you want your track to have a bit more energy and be a bit punchier, you want your kick drums to be a bit punchier and not have so much sustain. So the best way to affect that is to use the sustain in air transient. So if you listen to what happens, I've completely got rid of that sustain. Now you're not hearing it in context. In the mix you wouldn't notice it as much, but obviously as it's in solo, you're hearing it chopped off almost. Now you can do this various different ways. You can use envelopes, you can use EQ, you can use compression, but I prefer to use air transient. It's just a really quick way to shape how your kick drum sounds with the attack and with the sustain, especially on 909s. And that's just going to sound a lot punchier in the mix. So let's take that back to 0. Okay, moving on. Let's go into compression. The best way to learn how to use compression is to use compression. Now, I know that sounds a bit crazy, but when I've tried to explain to people over the last 40 or so years how compression works, I normally see them, they start to glaze over. And I start to go into this spiral of trying to get across how compression works. But it's actually really, really difficult to explain it. I've seen some people explain it really in simple terms, but they just miss something out. Or it seems really simple, but then it leaves so many questions. It's kind of like trying to describe the offside rule in football or soccer if you're in the US. People just glaze over. So the best way, in my opinion, and this is what I say to my clients, is pull up some sounds and play around with the attack and release and see what it does, and play around with the ratio. Now, I've set this up to be a relatively, well, in terms of transient, that's actually quite fast. Now, what that's going to do is going to start rounding the kick drum off. It's not going to do anything at the moment because I haven't got the threshold set, but now, what I want to say is, when you have a really quick attack on a transient sound, it's got a sharp transient, when you start having really quick attacks, you're going to start introducing distortion. Now, distortion, this can actually be quite good. And it's something that I use on 1176 compressors, for instance, because they have a really fast attack, and you can create a really nice distortion. But generally, it's not the best way to create distortion in the MPC because you don't really have any control over it. So just be mindful. You can hear there's a little bit of crunch on the start of that. It's actually quite nice. But as I open up the attack, you're going to start hearing the attack come through, the transient of the kick drum come through more, because I'm not rounding it off. So compression is a good way to sound design your kicks. Listen to what happens with the release as well. Because I've lengthened the release, that sustain part of the kick drum is disappearing. So like I said, the best way to really work out, really get a feel for how compression works is just to use compression. Just sit there for hours, days, weeks, which is what I've done over the years. And I still don't really understand compression properly. No, I do. But I still learn new things about compression every single day. Excuse me. So there you've got your compression set up, and that's there for you in your chain. Next thing, let's go into EQ. Now this is where I'm going to show you how to use the Pultec Low End Trick. Pultec is an EQ that you'll find in most professional studios. It's got a blue fascia, very famous EQ. And basically there's a technique which you can use where with the Pultec you can boost and attenuate the same frequency. So what people discovered was you would think that if you boost 60 hertz and you attenuate 60 hertz the same amount, you're going to flatline it. And it's not going to have any effect at all, is it? Because you've boosted 6 decibels and you've attenuated 6 decibels. So how's that going to make any difference? But on a Pultec, the best way to describe it would be that the attenuation circuit and the boosting circuit are different circuits, and they have slightly different curves. I think that's kind of how it works. So when let's say you boost 60 hertz by 6 decibels and you attenuate by 6 decibels, you don't flatline it. You create a kind of tight curve and consequently a really tight bass sound. You have a nice boom on the bass, on the fundamental, but you get rid of the mud the other side. I'm going to show you on this whiteboard that I very conveniently had beside me, just quickly, roughly how this works. And you're just going to look at that and think, what is he doing? So let's say that this is kind of where 60 hertz is. There you go, that line there. And I've boosted 60 hertz and I've attenuated 60 hertz. You can see here. But what's happened is rather than just flatlining it completely, it's kind of created a scoop the other side because of the way that the curves work in a Pultec. So that's how you get this really nice kind of tight end on the fundamental, sort of because of the way the curves works. You're not you're not boosting exactly 60 hertz, and you're not attenuating exactly 60 hertz because of the way curves work. You're kind of boosting and attenuating bits before and after, and that's what creates this really nice kind of like tight curve. Sorry, I'm looking at my monitor up there. So that's the shape of the Pultec curve. That's the best way that I can describe it anyway. Thank you for my whiteboard to my wife. Thank you very much. my wife board, perhaps I should call it. So in the MPC, we don't have a Pultec. So what we have to do is we have to kind of emulate a Pultec. So what I've done here, as you can see, is it's not exactly 60 Hertz. It's 62 Hertz on the low, because that's where the fundamental was, roughly, for my 909, but it will change depending on what kick drum you're using. But also, because of the way a digital EQ works, I couldn't have it at exactly 62 Hertz for the attenuation part of the EQ. I had to kind of use my ears and change it slightly. So I've pushed it up to about 75. Also, what I've done with the width of the Q, I guess, is I've made it a little bit narrower on 75 and a little bit wider on 60. And what that's done is it's kind of emulated. And I did this in Plugin Doctor on my computer, which is how I know roughly where it is. I haven't just used my ears. I did do it visually. So I emulated a Pultec curve as such using Plugin Doctor. And then I've then translated that onto the MPC here. So it's a slightly narrower curve on the Q for the attenuation part, and slightly wider for the boost part. And then literally what I'm going to do, give it a nice bit of boost and attenuate the same amount here. Now, I hope that you can hear that. You're going to have to use headphones. There's no way you're going to hear that on a phone or a nice set of monitors. But what you're going to hear is, you're going to hear, if I didn't have this, if I left that at 0, I'm going to be boosting a big bell curve, wide bell curve on the low end of the kick drum, the fundamental, and it's going to be really boomy. And that's not a bad thing, but it's going to build up in the mix a lot. It's going to get the mud. As you can hear on the kick drum, the 909 kick drum, as I said, the sustain is quite muddy. So by attenuating the same amount, I'm creating that curve and I'm tightening the kick drum up. So that's it's a classic trick. I didn't invent it or anything. It's been around for years. That's the Pultec Low End Trick in the MPC, as best as I can emulate it. It's not an exact science, and you're going to need to use your ears because obviously the fundamental of your kick is going to be slightly different. That's a nice little trick that I've set up for you there. So let's come out of there, and then finally we'll go into my favorite plugin on the MPC, Tube Drive. I've zeroed it for you because, as I've described in previous videos, the default of Air Tube Drive in the MPC from Akai is mental and makes no sense whatsoever. I don't know what they did. I don't know if they just went in there blind and just adjust it and right, save that as default. So I've zeroed it for you here, but you can do some great things with this. Bit of drive. Take the output down just to level it out. Saturation. Sounding like Jamie Oliver, aren't I now? The chef. That to me just adds pure flavour. Nice. It just gives a bit of grit and a bit of character to the kick drum, especially, you know, the 909s are very clean. For me, obviously this is subjective, the 909 is the perfect kick drum. It ticks all the boxes for me. Maybe it's because I make a lot of house music, but I've loved the 909 kick since the first time I ever heard it, and I've lost count of how many times I've used it in tracks in various different forms. So very, very clean. Just a bit of saturation and a bit of drive just dirties it up a little bit and just gives it a little bit of oomph. But what that will actually be doing, it's not quite balanced. It sounds louder in the mix, but it's actually not louder. In fact, you'll probably find that's actually a couple of dB lower, even though it actually sounds a bit louder. And I have actually covered that in a video. So that's Air Tube Drive. That might be a nice one. Just adding some harmonics and some saturation. Now, obviously, I've shown you these effects one by one, but you can use them all together. You can use them, use certain parts, like let's go for the Transient. See the difference that makes, because the harmonic saturation is working on the sustain quite a bit. So get rid of the sustain and you just get a bit of overdrive on the start of the kick. But you also, if you bring the sustain up, get this lovely overdrive on the sustain as well. So you can use them in combination with each other. Let's just take the sustain back up again. Nice. And then a bit of EQ. Let's just attenuate that a little bit more, boost that a little bit more. Just adds total character. And the point of, you know, this is more of a kind of sound design effects chain, to be honest. It's not just a simple boost the fundamental of the kick, give it a bit of low end, maybe cut a little bit of mud out. This is more sound design, you know, with the transient, the saturation, using the Pultec trick, using compression, tightening the kick drum up and stuff. So I've set that up purposely for this. You can just use the EQ just to boost the low end a little bit, but it's more, you've got the tools here to do some serious sound design on your kick drums. So there you have it. Feel free to download the effects chain, use it to your heart's content, share it. And I think if you really want to get into sound design on kick drums, I think it sets you up, it puts you in a really, really nice place. Being able to, you know, utilize the transient design, add some nice oomph to it, have that nice Pultec trick where you've got a nice tight kick drum and you've scooped out some space for your bass lines, and then add a bit of color at the end with the tube drive, add a bit of saturation. So I think, you know, I've put you in a nice place. Like I said at the start, don't copy the numbers. Every single kick drum is going to be different. So you need to use your ears a little bit. You need to use your experience a little bit. You need to learn, you know, what part, the fundamental of your kick drum, what parts you want to push, how much you want to push the transient, how much you want to change the sustain. But I feel like you'll be in a good place if you use this chain. Enjoy it, share it. Thanks for watching. This is A Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.